Hello everybody, and welcome back to the new Mindscape. In this video, I'm going to discuss human nature in religious teachings. So we know that evolution has made us such that for the imperative of animal survival, our animality, we have a strong concept of self, and we tend to revolve all our thoughts and actions around the ego, around our own survival, our desires, and our power. But materially and spiritually, the ego is an illusion. Materially, our bodies are ephemeral, temporary combinations of ever-changing molecules and cells. And spiritually, from the perspective of different religious and spiritual traditions, attachment to the ego is the ultimate cause of suffering and evil, of division between humans, and alienation from the world and from reality. Religious teachings aim to free us from this attachment to the ego, and to prescribe concepts and practices to align us to another understanding of ourselves, which is understood as our higher self, or our spiritual nature. A spiritual nature that is at one with others, with the universe, and with the ultimate reality. Within the different religious traditions, there are different understandings of the ego, of our spiritual nature, of the ultimate reality, and of the foundational spiritual teachers and divine figures who are the mediators between humans and the ultimate reality. But in spite of all those differences, most religious traditions consider that human beings have a dual nature. So in spite of the fact that religious traditions such as Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam have different theories and conceptions of human nature, they have one thing in common. They have a discourse on the complexity of human nature, which can be summed up as a dual understanding of human nature. So a person has a good side and a bad side, so to speak. And in some traditions, the bad side comes first, or is the most important, such as in Xunzi's view of human nature, or in the doctrine of original sin in Christianity. And in other traditions, the good side comes first or is more important, such as Mencius. Either way, there's always the idea that we have both. We have both our good side and our bad side, and there's also the idea that we can change. We can't be reduced to a single motive. We can't say that our nature is purely to be selfish, and we can't say that our nature is purely to be selfless, loving, or altruistic. We're a mixture of both. Religious scriptures often use different words to describe this twofold dimension of human nature. They talk about the higher self and the lower self. They talk about our divine nature and our animal nature. They talk about the everlasting and the perishable. They talk about our earthly and heavenly nature. They talk about the material and the spiritual. They talk about the soul and the body. All of these different aspects of human nature coexist, and yet they stand in contrast. The relative strength and weakness of these two sides of human nature are manifested in our daily actions and choices. Now, religious texts usually consider that the true reality of human beings is their spiritual nature or their higher nature, and that this is what distinguishes humans from other beings. So our spirituality can be contrasted to our animality or our materiality. In the Abrahamic tradition, so that's the religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith, humans are created in the image of God, and so they have the capacity to reflect divine attributes in this world. But our rebellion against divinity causes us to sin and prevents us from reaching our spiritual station. In the Buddhist tradition, our true nature is our Buddha nature, our 佛性, and this is the truth of our true knowledge, wisdom, and compassion. But our attachments and desires cause us to turn away from our true nature in ignorance. In the Taoist tradition, the more we connect with our true nature, the more we'll be in harmony with Tao. But the more we crave for fame and fortune, the more we disconnect ourselves from this original harmony. In the Confucian tradition, our heavenly nature, our 天性, allows us to act with authentic nobility as a 君子, but petty-mindedness, to be a 小人, prevents us from reaching the potential of who we truly are. In all of these traditions, each person decides, through his own thoughts and actions, to express either the higher or the lower side of his nature. According to this view, humans are endowed with some degree of free will and the faculty of rational thinking and consciousness of the spiritual dimension of reality. So religious scriptures often prescribe a process of spiritual growth, transformation, and transcendence, through which we try to live according to our true spiritual nature. The journey of life can be understood as a dynamic process of continually making choices, experiencing consequences, and reflecting on our ultimate purpose within this spectrum of human duality. This idea is expressed in a simple fashion through this Cherokee story. So this is a story of the Aboriginal indigenous people of America, the story of the two wolves. And let me just look it up here for a second. Right, so in the story it says that one evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It's anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other side is good. It's joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute, and then he asked his grandfather, "Well, which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." So one way of looking at this is to say that there are two levels of human nature. One is our biological nature, which follows the laws of Darwinian evolution. At this biological level, human nature is the product of evolution, which is about survival and genetic reproduction. Our biological nature gives us that drive to survive. So this is a self-interested drive. It's driven to meet our physical needs and to fulfill our physical purpose and function. And at that level, all of us always see the world from the self-interested perspective of our biology. Just like any animal that, at the end of the day, is concerned for its own survival. And so at that level, we're no different from any other animal. But then there's another level, which can be called our spiritual nature, and this is where our spirituality is rooted. At this level, we go beyond our animal or material nature. Something in us follows higher values or spiritual principles and sees the world beyond our own self-interest. It sees the world from the perspective of all of humanity, or even the whole universe. Religions consider that we all have this spiritual nature within us. In the traditions of these major world religions, this nature is described in different ways. So maybe it's called the spirit, maybe it's called the Buddha nature, maybe it's called our heavenly nature, or the idea that we are created in the image of God, so that there's something in us that is as perfect as God. Or as is said in Hinduism, that we have our higher nature or our higher self. There are many different ways of expressing this basic idea, that there's something in our nature that transcends, that leads us to go beyond our self-interest. In this idea of the duality of human nature, so we have an animal or a lower nature on the one hand, and we have a spiritual or a higher nature on the other hand. The lower nature is self-centered, selfish, or self-interested, while the higher nature is selfless, altruistic, or spiritual. So the concern then in these spiritual traditions of religion is how can we protect, rescue, develop, or strengthen our spiritual nature? From the perspective of Mencius and Xunzi, it's about how can we educate our spiritual nature to make it stronger and stronger, to make us into moral beings. From the perspective of Taoism, it's how to transform ourselves from a condition of turbidity, of zhuo, to a condition of purity and tranquility, of qingjing, to be at one with Tao. From a perspective of Buddhism, it's how to awaken our spiritual nature from a condition of illusion and ignorance. From the perspective of Christianity, it's about how to prevent us from falling into sin, or to rescue us from sin into salvation. From the perspective of Islam, it's about how to lead us from a condition of pride to a condition of humility and submission before God. No matter how it's expressed, the question of spiritual transformation, education, or salvation is fundamental in these different traditions.